Hello everybody, this is ManuS and welcome to another Legends of Runeterra video. Today it's time to finally catch up on reviewing the latest balance patch, the last balance patch before release and the new set. And there's quite a bunch of changes actually to talk about, so that's exciting. But before we dive in, you know the drill, hit the subscribe button down below. And I want to briefly talk to you about today's sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by NordVPN, one of the leading virtual private network providers out there. A virtual private network keeps your data secure and yourself anonymous while using the internet. NordVPN comes with super fast servers, allows you to unlock your favorite entertainment websites like Netflix. They provide a 30-day money-back guarantee. They also have an included cybersecurity suite, which acts as an ad blocker to boot. They don't lock any of your data, provide a 24/7 customer support, and you can use it on up to 6 simultaneous connections, so one account covers most or all of your electronic devices. And most importantly, they don't have any bandwidth limit, so you can use it non-stop without it getting throttled, which is particularly important for heavy users like us. It also won multiple awards and comes highly recommended by top technology experts. So if you're still surfing online without a VPN, now is the time to change that. Get NordVPN now, 70% off for a 3-year plan, including 1 month extra for free using the code ManuS or the personalized link in the description down below. And now on to today's content. Alright, so on to the balance changes. Patch notes 0.9.4. Bunch of comments here on champion health, especially Noxian champions being underrepresented. A lot on expedition tuning. I'll put the link in the description below if you want to read some of the devs notes. I don't want to go into those notes specifically because that will just kind of make the video get pretty bloated. Alright, on to the card changes. So first off, minor change to Draven, nothing big here really. He basically works now the way I initially thought he might work, which is he doesn't need to strike 2 separate times with an X, he just needs to strike with 2 X's in total. That means either 1 strike with 2 X's or 2 strikes with 1 X, which makes him slightly more levelable, but actually doesn't matter that much. It won't come up that often because in order to get the second X, unless your first Draven dies and you get to play a second, your Draven needs to strike a second time anyway, so you have the strike to get the second X, and then the second strike to either hit with the second X or with both X's. So it only gives you a bit more flexibility, time to make your choices, not pre-commit. For example, if you don't have a free discard, you don't need to just throw away a card to get level progress just to have your Draven die before you get to level it. You can just do it in 1 turn where it's safe. So it's just kind of a nice flexibility added, but it's a pretty minor thing. I don't think it actually matters much. But you might level slightly more often, but more so because it's more viable now to go for it rather than that it is easier or faster really. Because it actually doesn't really change since you can't really come by the second X without Draven hitting anyway. Next we have Katarina. So she was in a rough spot for quite some time, and she gets a pretty nice change here. Unfortunately, I can't enlarge it, so you might want to open the article in the comments below, especially if you're on a screen on mobile. So yeah, Katarina, now in addition to all the things she does before, in her non-leveled form, she on play creates a fleeting Blade's Edge in hand. So basically you get to ping something for free for 1 additional mana if you so choose and have the mana to do so. On level up, she's still the same, so it's only a one-time thing basically, unless, for example, you play her and she for some reason gets returned to your hand by a recall effect, then you can reuse it, but normally the only way she gets back into your hand is by her striking, which means she levels, which means no more Blade's Edge. But it's pretty nice basically, because before she was basically just this kind of rebuyable relentless pursuit, and otherwise pretty tempo inefficient and inflexible. And now she has this whole added dimension of value and utility, making her either good if the opponent has a 1 health unit, or in a situation where just you have the mana to spare to apply pressure with continuously playing her. So there are like 2 types of scenarios where you would want her and where she would be a valuable card to have, while before she only was like good in one specific scenario, which is pretty good. Like, it just makes her a better card to have in your deck because she's more likely to be useful to you in a wider range of situations, which is a really nice way of sort of fixing her, because her core concept is kind of nice and interesting and unique. So it's would be a shame to have to like give that up to make her viable. So I think this is a nice and interesting way to try and make her more viable. Next we have Yasuo's stats just got changed. Another buff to Yasuo. Now he's a 4/4 instead of a 4/3, so he gained 1 health point, which obviously also means he turns into a 5/5. I think both of these, in both versions, the stat point actually does quite a bit. 5/4 still trades with, especially on defense, with like all these 4-drops, while now a leveled Yasuo can actually, theoretically, if you have to, block most 4-drops without dying. And obviously the jump from 3 to 4 health is massive in this game because so many things deal 3 damage, like Grasp, Get Excited, a lot of units, single combat on a lot of these common units and stuff like that. There's a lot of things that deal 3 damage, or like a Thermogenic Beam with spell mana, or Mystic Shot plus Static Shock and so on. There's just a lot of combinations to deal 3, but dealing 4 is a much taller order, and there are not a lot of individual cards that can actually deal more than 3 damage, mainly basically Thermogenic Beam, and there are also fewer cards to combine, because there are some cards that deal 3 and then a bunch that deal 1, and you now need both of those, not just like the deal 3, which makes it much more durable. Also makes Yasuo actually a champion on defense, in the sense that now he can, at a risk of getting very fragile, at least hold off units without dying, which is also pretty nice, because before, like, you didn't have the attack token on 4, playing Yasuo basically meant effectively skipped your turn because you couldn't block at all. You would just trade with like most common units. So yeah, pretty nice change. I think this should finally cement Yasuo as a very solid like mid-range board control kind of champion that should be interesting, especially with his like support options potentially growing down the line with more sort of free roll stun and recall cards that aren't bad without Yasuo, and are just solid cards and get really good cards, become really good cards with Yasuo. Next change, Kalista got kind of reverted on her level up condition. She went back to the old 3+ allies instead of 4+ allies, which is a good change. I never liked the change from 3 to 4. Sure, her backside is really powerful now, but like not to a point where you needed to make her harder to level. We already know how hard this kind of level up condition can be from like Lucian, and she doesn't even have a shortcut like Lucian, and she comes down a turn later, and she's still reasonably fragile at 3 health. So I think now with 3 allies, she's in a very reasonable spot, and I think the card's actually pretty nice, and the more cards we get, the more likely it will be that there will be strategies that actually have room for her, because now a leveled up Kalista is actually a really powerful threat that isn't that easy to answer, both because of her stats and also because of her ability, and she generates tons of pressure. So I quite like the place that she is now. I think that was a good tone down, and something that a lot of people have been bringing. Next we have Laurent Duelist. He is now a 4/2 instead of a 3/2, which is nice. The card always felt a bit on the like weekend and a bit subpar, and now he just is a pretty decent threat alongside the challenger. Lets you like challenge their like best block on the duelist and then threaten to get in for 4, or make him maybe trade up against a better unit. They don't want to take 4. And he also blocks better on defense against like other units now. He can trade with some 4-drops that he couldn't before. Although that matters less actually, since one of the most common cost 4/4s just recently has been turned into a 4-3 and jump wump. But yeah, overall, a nice change. I don't think the card is going to be much more constructed relevant than before, but especially in Expedition, it feels a lot better. The card was always something that I didn't hate getting in a pile, but it's not like something that I was looking forward to. It was just like, okay, it could be worse. There are worse cards, but it wasn't like a card that I was actively looking forward to have. Then we have a change to Vanguard Bannerman to tone down the Demacia mid-range Bannerman decks. Now he only grants his buff to allies, not himself. So now he's basically a 4-cost 3/3 that buffs the rest of your board. That's actually a pretty big change, I think. First of all, the difference between 3/3 and 4/4 is massive. Like I mentioned, 4 health on 4 is a really big deal. Jump Wump, having lost 1 health point, was pretty rough since the majority of common played 2 and 3 drops have 3 or more attack, 3 or more power. So if your 4 drop trades down against 3s and 4s, like 3s is okay, but if he even like trades against like a majority of common 2s, feels pretty bad. And a 3/3 basically is like slightly above like a 2 drop in stats. So it's really only the buff. So every time you whiff the card, like, I mean, I guess the card didn't change every time you whiff, but yeah, so basically the payoff when you hit is less impactful to make up for the times you whiff. So you might actually want to take even fewer risks than before, if that makes any sense. It's a bit weird, but like normally the card was super strong when you hit, so the times you whiff, it's not that bad. Now, every time you hit, you're not even like making up as much for whiffing. It's kind of a weird thought. Maybe I'm just kind of like getting too in my head here. Anyway, speaking of Bannerman, the card will still be playable, but it might actually even be enough of a nerf for people to like reevaluate how to approach Demacia decks, since the deck doesn't even have that many bodies. So plenty of times you played your like Bannerman with like a second unit in play, and in that spot it's like a 50% nerf instead of like getting +2/+2 on your board. You only get +1/+1 on your board, and so on. And the deck isn't like built super low curve to go super wide, making this much weaker in a deck that isn't low to the ground and goes wide enough. So yeah, we'll see how that goes, but I think it's overall a good change. The card was a bit on the push side. On to Blood for Blood. That's a really nice change. Now it costs 2 instead of 3. I felt the card was like way too expensive for what it did. It was like very fragile and tempo inefficient. The opponent could blow you out with removal because it's fast, and it was just like very clunky and unappealing. I think at 2 now it's in a good place. It's appealing, it's still a real cost in terms of tempo and stuff, but now it's actually like a good balance between how much tempo investment it costs you for like what it does for you. So maybe if the battle scars thing is picking up steam with some new cards, maybe this could be more of a playable card now. Next we have a buff to Kato the Arm, another card that I kinda like and was very solid, but suffering a bit from the like whole 3 health issue that I just mentioned, because if it's already kind of bad that your 4 drop has 3 health, now imagine how bad it is if your 5 drop has 3 health and basically trades with any unit the opponent might realistically have if they actually are playing a deck that wants units. So 5/4 feels much better for a 5 drop, and not sure what deck would want him right now, but I think in the long run he's a pretty appealing, like powerful threat. I mean, he basically adds 8 attack to the board in 1 unit, plus the added damage potential of like Overwhelm if the opponent has only small jump blockers. So he's like a pretty swingy 5 drop for an aggressive strategy. I played 2 in the like Noxus Demacia aggro deck that I played some time ago, and he was already pretty solid in that one as 5/3, and now as 5/4 he's in a much better spot. The 3 health was awkward at times in that deck. Next we have Avarosan Trapper. He's now a 3-cost 3/3 instead of a 2/2, which is really nice actually. Like that card was just like very gimpy in like the cost effect ratio. And yeah, when he's summoned, create an Enraged Yeti in the top 3 cards of your deck is nice because it's really not that much of a gain. So making him a 3-cost 3/3 as like a solid baseline is very reasonable. Like if you compare him to some of the Demasios 3-cost 3/3s like Redeemer or Vanguard Sergeant, for example, he's still weaker because like Sergeant gives you a full card, Redeemer with some under some conditions gives you like a really high value card basically, while he just gives you the chance to like just lets you draw a 1-cost 5/5 I think Overwhelm over the next 3 turns. So if you draw it on like the next turn and have a like 2 or 3-cost play to use your mana well, then it's super powerful obviously to drop an Enraged Yeti on turn 4, but the more turns pass by, like if you draw it on the 3rd turn, it's like really not that impressive anymore in comparison. So the value really varies and it doesn't give you like an extra card, it just improves your draw step basically. It lets you draw a super undercosted good unit, but doesn't give you any additional resources. So making the unit more of a unit in its own right and reasonably average statted is a really good buff to it, and I like that. Might make the whole like Yeti thing more appealing. Not like seriously competitive, but at least like not frustratingly underpowered, you know, or something that can be enjoyable to play if you're looking for that without just getting your face stomped by like basically anything, because every card in the game is like has a much better rate than a lot of your cards. Next we have Starlit Seer. That's also a really nice change. The like 2-cost 2/2s are in a pretty awkward spot. So 3/2 or 2/3 is where it's at. So turning Starlit Seer into a 2/3 so he can help with like defense a little bit more, doesn't die to like Tracker, blocks 1-drops and stuff like that, is pretty nice and makes him more of a full card, because before he was basically just kind of like an enchantment. I mean, we don't have anything enchantment like in Runeterra, but basically like just a spell that was lying around that had this continuous effect, but the body was like most of the time irrelevant and also fragile. So yeah, this is nice. This makes the card actually pretty interesting because the effect can be quite powerful. So a nice change to make a card more of a constructed consideration than it was before. Withing Stones, they realized that they, I guess, over-nerfed it a bit, so they went back to the 0/4. Basically, the card was like a 2-drop, then a 3-drop, and got turned into an 0/4. Then they went back to the 0/3, but left the 3-cost, and now they went back to the 4 health on the 3-cost version, which feels about right. Like at 3, once again, a bit awkward, does barely block anything, is also kind of slow. So yeah, I like that change. Makes the card more constructed viable again, and feel less like just sort of a spell that is lying around. It's kind of the same thing as with Starlit Seer and Trapper, making it more of a like body that can do more than just be the text that is on it, and have like actual stats that can let it get into combat without just falling over for free. Then Shady Character now is a 1/3 instead of a 1/1, at base stats, simply making him much harder to kill so he doesn't get Mystic Shotted or like pinged for free with his play trigger on stack. Which is good because that was a big problem, made the card completely unplayable and constructed basically, and now the card is actually like in a place where if you look for this type of clone ability, it could be an interesting and appealing constructed card. His like power level is very reasonable and the fragility was too low, and now the fragility is in a healthy place, I think. So we might see that card pop up here and there in the long run, especially if there are more things where copying stuff is going to be good. The last card change we have is Frenzied Skitter. This card was talked about for a long time, and I've been involved in plenty of discussions myself, considering a stat change to make him like 2-3 or 3-2, lose 1 stat point for how much utility and power he brings in having fearsome. So yeah, I like the change. And while I was contemplating more of a 2-3, I think at the time, I like the 3-2 a lot better. Makes him less obnoxious against cards like Draven, and especially Zed, for example. Not just completely time walking you, but just basically now mitigating the blow from a Zed and maybe allowing you like 2-drop elites to stall Zed if you also happen to have that. But you need more than just Skitterer to completely blank the opponent's return now in a lot of situations, which is nice. So it also makes the card more of an aggro card and less of a like mid-range control card. Like we have seen so many like Shadow Isles controlling decks just play Skitterer because he's such a like defensive power play on 3 to steal the opponent's attack turn, that I think that's much more in line with what the card is meant to do. It's meant to be sort of an aggro spiders tool and not just like a standalone defensive free roll in like any reactive Shadow Isles deck. They can still play it, but it's going to do a whole lot less for them, so they'll probably just want to look for something else, since a 3-2 for 3 is really not that great in a deck that is interested in blocking. Then we have the watch list, Ezreal and Karma. Basically talking about that like Ezreal isn't quite much must change level, but they acknowledge that he might need some sort of adjustments to tone him down a little bit to make games against Ezreal decks a bit more healthy, because they can be a bit like uninteractive and you just kind of sit there and die to the Ezreal without much you can do about it. So yeah, they're investigating and testing possible tweaks that improve on Ezreal's more frustrating aspects while retaining his excitement and build around potential, which seems like a good philosophy. We'll see what that looks like in practice. And then we have Karma on the watch list. While Karma is off, is one of the most flashy and exciting cards in Legends of Runeterra. Some of the strategies we've seen built around her push the limits of what should be consistently possible in terms of insane comebacks or one-turn kills. Basically, we love the crazy stuff Karma can enable, as long as it's not too easily attainable or meta warping. For now, we are just closely monitoring her power level and the different variants being built around her. So another card that has been in the conversation a bunch for a couple of weeks, of people thinking that too powerful of a game tool. And yeah, she's strong, she's flashy, she does a lot of stuff, but yeah, I didn't quite feel she's like problematic, but I think the watch list is a good place for her. Like, I think just changing her a lot is too early and not that necessary, but keeping an eye on her seems reasonable, because it's clearly one of the like dominant strategies right now. Like, there are a lot of various like late game Karma decks, so it makes sense to keep an eye out to make sure she's not becoming like oppressive. Then a couple of clarity changes. So they removed the barrier keyword on Bright Steel formation. That doesn't really matter in most cases, but it actually matters in like very rare cases. First of all, it matters for synergy with Shen and Greenglade Caretaker, and it matters in cases where you in some way would reanimate a Bright Steel formation, because it's play and not when I'm summoned. So in the past, the formation itself would still have barrier, even if it was brought back with like a harrowing or stuff like that, while now it will just come back as a 9. Other than that, card didn't change. So this is a bit more than a clarity change, actually. Actually like a very, very marginal nerf. So this is not any change at all. This doesn't change the functionality of the card at all. Swift Ring Lancer now correctly states that it creates a random elite in hand, which I like, because I thought it was very kind of weird that it didn't say random, because like, sure, I get making things as less wordy as possible, but really like don't have to push it to a point where you just exclude simple words that add to the clarity of what the card does. So I like that they added the word random here. Viperian Assessor, actually also not just a clarity change, so this is actually like, I guess, a subtle buff, because now it's when I'm summoned instead of play, making it better for like cloning, resurrection, and all that stuff. So it's actually a slight buff that makes the card a bit more like intuitive, I guess. And then we have Shark Chariot. Also not necessarily a clarity change, it's more of a cleanup. Before, when he attacks, he would return to play, so you would just get like a clean new Shark Chariot without any buffs, without any like nerfs, so Purify wouldn't work on him. While the new text gives him a last breath, and the next time an ephemeral ally attacks, you revive the chariot. So that means if he's purified, he can't be revived because the last breath didn't happen, so you purify the thing that triggers the comeback. Iceborne Legacy will now work more effectively with Chariot. Revived copies of Shark Chariot will now gain the buff, while before they were like fresh. Well, I guess that's kind of weird. Like, Iceborne Legacy should have worked before, right? Because even if it's returned, since Iceborne Legacy buffs copies everywhere, that also would include cards that come back. So, not sure what they're saying there. If it didn't work with Iceborne Legacy, it should have, I think. So that's weird. And of course, Chariot will now be affected by cards that affect last breath units. So you can actually pull a Shark Chariot with Warden Spray, for example. That's neat. Makes it pop up a little more in games, even without you actually putting it in the deck. Then there are some Expedition archetype changes. First of all, we get a new archetype called Crimson Guard. It's a Demacia Noxus archetype. It's sort of like a bonus archetype, so not one that is super likely to pop up, but one that you can get into, kind of like Teemo and stuff like that. And it's built around like Tough, Barrier, and like the Crimson guys, and like the wholesale farm, mid-range value grind. So actually a pretty cool archetype. I like the addition of this archetype. It uses some of the like less super pre-constructed synergies that are still like very much existing and very cohesive and functional, and adds a nice additional dimension to limit. So I like that. Then some small changes to some archetypes. Demacian Steel, still too good, not too surprised. So they removed Detain from the archetype. Mono Demacia. Then Discipline got Will of Ionia removed because they felt like there are too many commons, and Will of Ionia is not necessary for the hand buff sub-theme that's going on there. Noxian Might, still a bit too good at just like curving out and overwhelming opponents, so they added a card that has some synergy with the strategy but is weaker and slower to basically dilute the density and consistency of what the archetype currently does, which is an interesting way of balancing a bit, especially because like adding one card is not like that big of a nerf. I guess Shanpo is not a great card, so it's not a card I want to get, but it's only one card. So at its core, the archetype still functions the same, you just have less consistency, though. So that's kind of an interesting change. Then Shroom and Boom got some cards added and removed. They added Prodigy, Amateur Aeronaut, Flash of Brilliance, and Get Excited, and removed Cloud, Grab Dash Assembly, Eager Apprentice, and Assembly Bot to take away some of the like weaker standalone or like bad cards and add some more solid cards, which is nice. The scrap the assembly bot plan seemingly wasn't very viable. I never like played the archetype, but so they're basically trying to like improve the bonus archetype. Spellbound got Dawn Speakers added, and they removed Barrier, Thydria the Bold, and Static Shock. That's kind of an interesting change, honestly. But yeah, they have found new life through the updated Mage Seeker unit, so we're removing a couple of its spells that cost less than 6 mana, while also replacing an epic card that's seen a bit too frequently with one that was previously only in a single archetype, to sort of tone down the archetype a bit, I guess. They removed Vengeance from Retribution, added Starlit Seer, and removed Battle Fury from the Battle Scars archetype, which is nice given the buff to Starlit Seer, making the card a lot more and synergize with the archetype. Here they added the Battle Fury that they removed in the other archetype, and removed Avaros and Trapper, Telltales, and Ancient Yeti from the Enlightenment archetype, so they removed the whole Yeti sub-theme, which is kind of nice because I think that actually hurt the archetype quite a lot. And it also got the buff to Wording Stones in that. Then they added and removed a whole bunch of cards from Cloning Program, Ancient Evil, Shadow and Dust, and Fluffed and Tuffed, the Power sub-archetype. Not gonna go over these too much detail. Make sure to check them out down below if you wanna look at the details. I feel like I'm just rattling off cards here too much. Basically, they did some major overhaul of Expedition and some rebalancing, which overall sounds pretty good and should make Expedition feel a bit more fresh for people that's still playing it a lot. I mostly played it to attain cards, and now that I don't need that anymore, I haven't played Expedition in quite some time. Then some miscellaneous changes. This is actually a pretty important known issue. I had that recently, started a week ago or something, and had no idea what was happening. I was using the same shortcut pinned to my taskbar that I have been using since day one, so it seems like they fucked up something and it didn't work, but apparently if you reinstall it, the shortcut it creates works reliably, so you can pin that, and then that seems to work. Currently it's working again for me, but I'll keep an eye on it. But it's good to know that that is a common issue and they are aware of it, and it's not something specific to my system and my setup, because I was not sure if maybe I had something installed or changed that caused that issue. But it seems to be on the end. So Friend Challenge will now randomly assign first and second player in each match. That's actually kind of bad. I hope we get to pick and choose. Not sure how it worked before. I don't think you could choose either. Was it not random? I mean, I thought it was random. Not sure what criteria it was using before, when we were playing the tournament. Some of these bug fixes are weird and not actually bug fixes, so I don't like that they list those under bug fixes, because they might get lost. I often just didn't even check the bug fixes, because it's okay, it's just bugs, so things work the way they are supposed to, when some of these bug fixes actually massively change card functionality. For example, Shadow Shift will no longer cause targeted spells to fizzle. They now hit their new target. That's not a bug fix. It was super intuitive to me and most people that Shadow Shift would work like a Will of Ionia that also makes a 3/2 while recalling the unit you recall. Now it doesn't do that anymore. Now it basically just works like Stand United. It basically swaps the Shadow Shift in your hand with the unit in play, and therefore making the card much worse. I really don't like that change. Shadow Shift is already a really bad card, and the only redeeming quality it had, in fact, was to use it to save something and fizzle an opposing spell. Now the card is just straight up terrible. What's the appeal of a 3-cost 3/2 ephemeral that just doesn't even really trade 1-for-1 with opposing spells anymore? I don't see how this is a bug fix. It's just basically a change of the card functionality, and pretty weird that this is supposedly not how it should have worked. It feels like it never was a bug. It just feels like they changed their mind on how the card should work, and this should be in the clarity section, or even in the nerf section, obviously. Same with Static Shock. Static Shock can now be cast even if there is only one available target. It's kind of like the change to Rummage in a way. slightly less extreme than the Ramage change, but in the same vein, don't see how that was a bug or is a bug fix. It just makes Static Shock a lot better because now you can always cycle it, because you can always just ping the opponent and draw a card, which is really nice and makes the card actually a lot less awkward. Because before there were plenty of cases against like reactive decks when there was no board. You had the Static Shock sitting in your hand, you couldn't even like use your mana to cycle it. So that's a really nice change, but don't see how that's a bug fix. It's actually a subtle buff and a clarification to make it less restrictive and more intuitive and easy to use for newer players. Noxian Guillotine now correctly indicates that it will create a copy of itself. No real change here. Stand United before, apparently, when you swap 2 units. If you swapped a blocked unit with a unit that had a blocker, but the blocker is gone, then the new unit would not be treated as if it was blocked by the unit that was there before but isn't there anymore, and the swapped unit would deal damage through the prior blocker. Now, even if you swap, the new unit will still count as blocked by the old blocker that is no longer there. It's a bit hard to follow, but it's a good change, and that sounds actually kind of like a bug, and is a bug fix, but it's a relevant one. Impersonate will now fizzle if shady character is recalled or killed first. Shouldn't be very relevant, because it can only be relevant if there's like something on the stack that is targeting Impersonate, but now might not do something because Impersonate fizzles, and I can't even think of a card or an effect where that happens. Throwing Poison Puff Caps now has correct sounds for different numbers of mushrooms. That's good, because there was this bug where with 1 mushroom it still had the like counting sound of like 10 mushrooms happening or something. So that's nice. And then some visual effects cleanups, and a bug apparently where Crimson Curator was showing incorrect info when using Oracle Eye. Alright, quite a big patch before release, but nice, like still quite a bunch of adjustments. I like the changes and adjustments that happened. Just as I said, don't like hiding some of the basically clarity cleanups and or like functionality adjustments under bug fixes when the stuff is not something that anyone would consider a bug or expect it to be considered a bug, and might therefore be lost because not everyone like reads the bug fixes, because it's just usually mostly a bunch of random info that you half of it you weren't even aware of, or it's like you couldn't even like, it didn't impact gameplay decisions. It was just the way it was, and now it's the way it's supposed to be, and that's it. So like that's why I almost never read bug fixes, because it's like, okay, they fixed stuff that wasn't working. Cool. I don't care too much like which small glitches and stuff were there that are now gone that I might have not even been aware of. So I wonder what I have missed in like past bug fixes at times. Alright. Yeah, that's my review of the last patch before we head into release. Super stoked for the new cards. This should make ranked more interesting again until we get the new cards. How do you feel about these balance changes? Let me know in the comments down below. And of course, if you enjoy the content, make sure to hit the subscribe button, turn on your notification icon, leave a like, comment, share, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. I'm your host ManuS.